Black conservationist saves rare turtles stunned to discover they're endangered. The night air crackled with tension as lightning flashed across the angry sky. Dr. James Coleman, his face etched with desperation, dragged the heavy wooden crate across the beach. Rain pelted his skin, each drop stinging like a tiny bullet. Inside the crate, 6 turtle hatchlings, perhaps the last of their kind, shifted helplessly. "We're not going to make it," shouted Elaine, her silver hair plastered to her face as she struggled with another crate. Behind them, the roar of engines grew louder. Headlights cut through the darkness, bouncing wildly as the trucks navigated the sandy terrain. "They're coming," Marcus yelled, his weathered hands frantically digging a makeshift barricade in the sand. "If they get these turtles, that's it, they're gone forever." James looked from the approaching lights to the tiny creatures in his care, their existence hanging by a thread. His life's work, decades of research, the future of an entire species, all converging in this one desperate moment. The lead truck skidded to a halt 30 yards away. 4 men jumped out, carrying spotlights and something worse, guns. "Stop right there," the leader's voice boomed across the beach. "Those are worth 50,000 each to collectors. You have no idea what you're messing with." James stood tall, placing himself between the men and the turtles, rain streaming down his face. His heart hammered against his ribs as he made a decision that would change everything. "I know exactly what I'm messing with," he said, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. "And I know who sent you." The leader's face changed, shock, then rage. He raised his gun, but let's go back to how this all started. It was just 3 hours earlier when James was enjoying a quiet evening in his research station, unaware that before the night was over, he would be fighting not just for the turtles, but for his own life as well. James Coleman sat at his desk, sipping coffee from a mug that read Earth Day 1970. Outside the windows of his modest research station, the Gulf of Mexico stretched endlessly, its waters turned golden by the setting sun. At 63, James carried himself with the quiet dignity of a man who had devoted his life to something larger than himself. His close-cropped hair had long since turned gray, but his eyes remained sharp, missing nothing. The radio played softly in the background, Marvin Gaye's "Mercy, Mercy Me, the Ecology," as James reviewed his field notes. 35 years as a marine biologist, and he still wrote everything by hand first. His colleagues teased him about it, but old habits die hard. "Computer crashed again?" Elaine Henderson appeared in the doorway, a wry smile on her face. At 68, she was the station's senior researcher and James's closest friend. They'd met during the first Earth Day demonstrations, back when environmental activism was just finding its voice. "Paper doesn't need recharging," James replied with a chuckle. "Besides, some things deserve the human touch." Elaine settled into the chair across from him. "Any news from the beach survey?" James shook his head. "Nothing yet. Marcus should be back soon." As if on cue, the door burst open and Marcus Wright rushed in. Despite being in his 50s, Marcus moved with the energy of a much younger man. His face, however, wore an expression James hadn't seen before, a mixture of excitement and concern. "You need to see this," Marcus said, slightly out of breath. "Both of you." James and Elaine exchanged glances before following Marcus to his jeep. The vehicle bounced along the sandy road leading to the eastern beach, a secluded area rarely visited by tourists. "What exactly are we looking at?" James asked as they drove. "Turtle tracks," Marcus replied, keeping his eyes on the rough road. "But not like any I've seen before, at least not in the wild." 10 minutes later, they stood on the beach, the warm Gulf breeze tousling their hair. Marcus led them to a spot just above the tide line, where distinctive tracks led from the water to a small depression in the sand. James knelt, studying the marks with growing amazement. "This can't be." "That's what I thought," Marcus said quietly, "but then I found this." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small plastic bag containing a fragment of eggshell. James took the bag, examining it closely. "Olive Ridley here?" "Not just any Olive Ridley," Elaine said, peering over his shoulder. "This pattern, it's from the Lowamba subspecies, but that's impossible. They've never been documented outside of a small region in West Africa." James stood, scanning the beach with new intensity. "They were thought to be extinct in the wild by the late 80s. The last confirmed nest was found in 1989. Could it be escaped specimens?" Marcus suggested. "There was that private collection in Miami that got hit by Hurricane Andrew back in '92. James shook his head. "Those were all accounted for. They ended up in zoos across the country." He paused, thinking, "We need to find this nest, if there's even a chance that what we're seeing is a wild Lowamba Ridley nest." The 3 conservationists spread out, carefully following the tracks. The sun was sinking rapidly now, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and reds. "Over here," Elaine called after several minutes. James and Marcus hurried over. There, partially concealed by beach grass, was a turtle nest. James carefully brushed away some of the sand, revealing several eggs. "My God," he whispered, "it's true." "How many do you think?" Marcus asked. "Hard to say without disturbing them," James replied, "but Lowamba Ridleys typically lay between 6 and 10 eggs, much smaller clutches than other sea turtles." Elaine was already taking photos. "This changes everything if there's a breeding population." "We need to set up monitoring," James said firmly. "Round the clock, these eggs need protection." As they discussed logistics, none of them noticed the man standing on the dunes behind them, watching through binoculars. By the time they returned to the jeep, he was gone, already making a phone call that would set dangerous events in motion. Back at the research station, the three conservationists gathered around the conference table, the excitement of their discovery tempered by the enormous responsibility it represented. The warmth in her voice brought a smile to his face. "It's been too long. How are you?" "I'm well, but I'm calling about something important." He hesitated. "I think we found a Lowamba Ridley nest here on the Gulf Coast." The silence that followed was profound. "That's impossible," Margaret finally said. "The last confirmed breeding female died in captivity in 2006. "I know what the records say, Margaret, but I've seen the eggs, the tracks. I've sent you photos." He could hear her typing, then another long pause. "These markings," she said, her voice now tight with controlled excitement. "The shell fragment pattern. James, this looks authentic, but how after all this time? I don't know, but if there's even one breeding female out there, then others might exist too," Margaret finished. "This could be the conservation discovery of the decade, but James, you need to be careful if collectors find out." "I know," he said grimly. "That's why I'm calling. I need your expertise and your discretion." "You have both," she assured him. "I can be on a plane tomorrow." "Thank you, Margaret. In the meantime, we'll set up protection for the nest." After ending the call, James sat back, his mind racing. Lowamba Ridleys, named after the Lowamba region in Ghana where they were first documented, were among the rarest sea turtles ever recorded. Smaller than other olive Ridleys with distinctive shell patterns, they had been decimated by a combination of habitat loss, pollution, and collection for the exotic pet trade. By the time international protection efforts began in the 1980s, most experts believed it was already too late. And yet somehow here they were, on his beach. A knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. Elaine entered, holding a tablet. "You need to see this," she said, placing it on his desk. The screen showed satellite imagery of their coastline, dated 3 weeks earlier. There, visible on the same beach, was the unmistakable pattern of turtle tracks. "She's come ashore at least twice," Elaine said. "And look at this." She swiped to another image. "This is from last year, same season." James leaned forward, studying the faint marks in the sand. "You think she's been coming here for years, undetected?" "It's possible. This area is rarely visited, and the tracks would be gone with the next high tide or strong wind." The implications were staggering. If this turtle had established a nesting pattern on this beach, it suggested not just survival but adaptation. And where there was one breeding female, there might be others. The phone on his desk rang. It was Marcus. "James, I've found 2 more sets of tracks, different sizes. I think we have at least 3 females." James gripped the phone tighter. "Are there nests?" "Yes." "Both laid within the last week, judging by the tracks. One looks like it's already hatched. There are tiny tracks leading back to the water." "Any sign of predation, human interference?" "None that I can see, but James, I'm not alone out here. There's a boat anchored offshore, looks like a private yacht." James felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. "Can you see anyone?" "No, but there's a dinghy on the beach about half a mile from my position." "Get back to the station, now." James hung up and turned to Elaine. "We may have company, someone who's not supposed to be here." As they hurried to the monitoring room, the station's security system, installed after a break-in 3 years earlier, displayed feeds from cameras positioned around the perimeter. Most showed nothing unusual, but the one facing the access road revealed a black SUV parked just beyond the gate. "Did you see that pull up?" James asked. Elaine shook her head. "The system only records when there's movement." "They must have arrived while we were on the beach." James checked the time, 7:42 p.m. The sun had set and darkness was falling quickly. "Call the sheriff," he told Elaine. "Tell them we have unauthorized visitors." But before she could reach for the phone, the lights went out, plunging the station into darkness. "Backup generator should kick in," James said, moving toward the emergency kit where they kept flashlights. The generator hummed to life, but only the emergency lights came on. The security system remained dark. "They've cut the main power and disabled the generator's primary circuit," Elaine said, her voice calm despite the situation. "Someone who knows what they're doing." A vehicle engine roared outside, followed by the sound of tires on gravel. James grabbed a flashlight and moved to the window. The black SUV was pulling away, heading back toward the main road. "They're leaving?" Elaine sounded confused. James felt his stomach drop. "No, they're going to the beach." He turned to her, his expression grim. "They know about the turtles." Marcus burst through the door, out of breath. "There are men on the beach, 3, maybe 4. They have equipment, looks like they're planning to dig up the nests." James grabbed his keys. "Call the sheriff and the Coast Guard. Tell them we have poachers after an endangered species." "James, wait." Elaine caught his arm. "You can't go out there alone. These people, if they're after Lowamba Ridleys, they're not just random poachers. The black market value is precisely why I can't wait," James finished. "Those hatchlings won't survive an hour in amateur hands. They need specific conditions." Marcus stepped forward. "Then we all go." There was no time to argue. The 3 conservationists rushed to the Jeep, grabbing equipment on the way: crates, towels, temperature-controlled containers designed for transporting delicate marine life. As they drove toward the beach, Elaine made the calls, her voice steady as she reported the emergency. But help would take time to arrive. The research station was isolated by design to minimize human impact on the delicate coastal ecosystem. They parked behind the dunes and proceeded on foot, using red-filtered flashlights to minimize visibility. The night was clear, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on velvet. Under different circumstances, it would have been beautiful. From their vantage point on the dunes, they could see flashlight beams moving on the beach below. 4 men were gathered around one of the nests, already digging. "We need a distraction," James whispered. "Something to draw them away long enough for us to secure the hatchlings." Marcus nodded. "The emergency flares in the Jeep. I could set one off down the beach, make them think it's the authorities arriving." "Do it," James said. "Elaine and I will get the turtles." As Marcus disappeared back toward the Jeep, James and Elaine prepared the transport containers, lining them with damp sand at precisely the right temperature. "Just like Kenya in '83, Elaine murmured. "Remember those black rhino calves?" James nodded. During his time with the International Conservation Corps, he and Elaine had participated in numerous emergency relocations of endangered species. But this was different. This was personal. A bright red flare suddenly illuminated the sky half a mile down the beach. The poachers stopped digging, their attention drawn to the unexpected light. "Now," James whispered. They moved quickly but carefully down the dune, staying low. The poachers had already uncovered the eggs, some of which were beginning to hatch. Tiny turtles, no bigger than a silver dollar, were emerging from their shells. While the men were distracted, arguing about the flare, James and Elaine gathered the hatchlings and remaining eggs, placing them gently in the containers. "Freeze! Nobody move!" The voice came from behind them. James turned slowly to find himself facing a tall man in expensive outdoor gear holding a pistol. "Dr. Coleman, I presume?" The man's voice had a slight European accent. "Your reputation precedes you." "Who are you?" James asked, trying to keep the man's attention on him while Elaine continued securing the turtles. "My name is not important. What matters is that those turtles are worth a great deal to certain collectors. Far more than your research grant, I assure you." The other poachers had noticed the confrontation and were hurrying back. James counted the seconds, knowing that Marcus would return soon as well. "Lowamba Ridleys are protected under the Endangered Species Act and CITES," James said firmly. "The penalties for trafficking," the man laughed. "Penalties only matter if you're caught, doctor, and we won't be." He gestured to one of his men. "Get the containers." As the man stepped forward, a new light appeared, headlights coming fast along the beach. Marcus had returned with the Jeep, driving directly toward them. The poachers scattered. In the confusion, James grabbed the container of hatchlings, and he and Elaine ran toward the approaching vehicle. "Get in," Marcus shouted, skidding to a halt beside them. They jumped in, placing the precious cargo on the back seat. But as Marcus accelerated away, the sound of engines behind them indicated the poachers weren't giving up. "Head for the old fishing pier," James directed. "We can make a stand there until help arrives." The chase was on, 2 vehicles racing along the darkened beach. The Jeep had the advantage of Marcus's local knowledge, but the SUV was more powerful, gradually closing the gap. "How long until the sheriff gets here?" James asked. Elaine checked her phone. "No signal, we're on our own." The old pier loomed ahead, its weathered pilings stretching into the gulf like skeletal fingers. Marcus drove the Jeep up the beach access ramp and parked beneath the pier's wooden structure. "Now what?" he asked. James assessed their situation. The pier offered some cover, but they were essentially trapped. The poachers would be arriving any moment. "We need to split up," he decided. "Marcus, take half the hatchlings and head north along the service road." Elaine and I will go south with the rest. They'll just follow the jeep, Marcus pointed out. Not if they think all the turtles are with it, James replied. He pulled out his phone. I'll call Margaret Abernathy. Her hotel is only 10 miles from here. Tell her to meet you at the old bait shop on Highway 90. As they carefully divided the hatchlings between two containers, the SUV's headlights appeared on the beach. James handed Marcus the keys to the research station. The backup incubator and storage room B, get them in there as soon as possible. Marcus nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. What about you two? We'll manage, James assured him, though he wasn't entirely sure how. Go now. As Marcus disappeared into the darkness, heading away from the beach, James and Elaine grabbed their container and moved in the opposite direction. Behind them, the SUV had stopped and men were getting out, flashlights scanning the area. We need somewhere to hide, Elaine whispered. James looked around desperately. The beach offered little cover and the dunes were too far to reach without being spotted. Then he remembered the old Coast Guard station, abandoned after Hurricane Katrina but still standing half a mile down the beach. This way, he murmured. They moved as quickly as they dared, the container between them. Inside, the tiny turtles shifted, their lives depending on the two humans carrying them through the darkness. The abandoned building appeared ahead, a dark silhouette against the starlit sky. Its windows were boarded up, but James knew the back entrance had been used by local fishermen as a shelter during storms. Almost there, he encouraged Elaine, who was keeping pace despite her age. But as they approached the building, lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the beach. A shout from behind confirmed their worst fear: they had been spotted. Inside, quickly. They slipped through the damaged rear door into the musty interior. The building was a single large room with a small office to one side. Years of neglect had left it filled with debris, but it offered shelter and hiding places. The office, James directed. We can barricade the door. They moved carefully through the darkness, guided by occasional flashes of lightning through broken sections of the roof. Outside, rain began to fall, softly at first, then with increasing intensity. The office was small but defensible, with only one door and no windows. They set the container on what had once been a desk, checking that the hatchlings were still secure. 6 of them, Elaine confirmed. All alive. James pushed an old filing cabinet against the door. That won't hold them for long if they're determined. James, Elaine's voice had changed, becoming softer. If they take these turtles, what happens? He met her gaze in the dim light. Best case. They end up in private collections, separated with no chance to breed. Worst case, they die within days from improper handling. Either way, a species that has somehow survived against all odds would be lost forever. She nodded, her expression resolute. Then we don't let that happen. Before James could respond, the sound of the front door being forced open echoed through the building. Voices followed. The poachers had entered. Find them, ordered the accented voice of their leader. And be careful with those turtles. They're worth nothing dead. Flashlight beams swept through the main room. James and Elaine remained motionless, barely breathing. A phone buzzed. Someone answered. Yes, you're sure, all of them? A pause. Excellent, we'll be there within the hour. Another pause. No, we still have the older ones to deal with. Can't leave witnesses. The implication was clear. These men weren't just after the turtles. They would eliminate anyone who stood in their way. James looked around the office, searching for anything that might serve as a weapon or an escape route. His eyes fell on an old VHF radio, still mounted on the wall, probably dead, but he reached for it, carefully lifting it from its bracket. The back panel was missing, exposing wires and circuit boards, if he could just. A crash of thunder shook the building, followed by a sudden increase in the rain's intensity. Water began to drip through the damaged roof. Check in there, the leader ordered, his voice closer now. Footsteps approached the office door. James positioned himself beside it, the radio in his hands. Elaine stood on the other side, a piece of broken chair leg clutched in her fist. The handle turned. The door pushed against the filing cabinet, moving it slightly. It's blocked, a voice reported. Something's against the door. Move it, came the curt reply. The door pushed harder, the filing cabinet sliding inch by inch. James tensed, ready to swing the radio at whoever entered first. Suddenly, a new sound cut through the night's sirens, distant but approaching. The pushing stopped. Boss, cops are coming. How we cut their communications? Must have been that other vehicle, the one that got away, the leader cursed. Get back to the SUV. We'll deal with this another time. Footsteps receded, followed by the sound of the front door opening and closing. Through a crack in the boarded window, James saw flashlights moving rapidly back toward the beach. Are they gone? Elaine whispered after a minute of silence. I think so, James replied, though he wasn't entirely convinced. But we can't stay here. That was probably just a local patrol responding to Marcus's call, if the poachers realize that they might come back. Where do we go? We're on foot in a storm with baby turtles. James checked his phone, still no signal. The storm was interfering with reception. They needed a plan. The main road is about half a mile inland, he said, thinking aloud. If we can reach it, we might flag down a passing car or at least get a signal to call for help. Elaine nodded, already preparing the container for transport. These little ones can't take much more stress. We need to get them to a proper facility soon. James moved the filing cabinet and cautiously opened the door. The main room was empty, the only sound the patter of rain on the damaged roof. He motioned for Elaine to follow, and they made their way back to the rear entrance. Outside, the storm had intensified. Rain fell in sheets and lightning forked across the sky at regular intervals. The beach, at least, was empty. The poachers had indeed fled. Stay close to the dunes, James instructed. Less exposed. They began their trek, struggling against the wind and rain. The container, while not heavy, was awkward to carry, especially when trying to maintain the stability vital for the hatchlings. They had covered about half the distance to the road when headlights appeared on the beach behind them. Down! James pulled Elaine into the shadow of a dune. The vehicle, the black SUV, drove slowly along the beach, its powerful lights sweeping across the sand. They were searching, methodically covering the area. They know we couldn't have gotten far on foot, James whispered. The SUV stopped about 100 yards away. Two men got out, their flashlights joining the headlights in scanning the surroundings. We can't outrun them, Elaine said, her voice barely audible above the storm. Not with the turtles. James knew she was right. They needed another strategy. His eyes fell on a large piece of driftwood partially buried in the sand. An idea formed, desperate, risky, but possibly their only option. Take the turtles, he told Elaine. Continue toward the road. Stay in the dunes, out of sight. What are you going to do? Create a diversion, draw them away. Elaine shook her head. It's too dangerous. We don't have a choice, James insisted. Those hatchlings are what matter now. After a moment's hesitation, Elaine nodded. Be careful. Always am, he replied with a forced smile. Go now, while they're still far enough away. As Elaine disappeared into the darkness with the precious cargo, James picked up the driftwood. It was heavy, waterlogged from years of washing in and out with the tides, but that would work to his advantage. He waited until the searchlights were pointing away from him, then moved to a position about 50 yards to the side of the SUV. Taking a deep breath, he hurled the driftwood as hard as he could toward the vehicle. The wood struck the side of the SUV with a resounding thud. Immediately, the flashlights swung in that direction. What was that? Over there, movement. James was already running, not toward the road, but parallel to the beach, drawing the poachers away from Elaine's position. Behind him, he heard the SUV's engine start, followed by the sound of tires spinning in wet sand. He pushed himself harder, his 63-year-old legs protesting the sudden exertion. Rain lashed his face, nearly blinding him. But he kept going, driven by the knowledge that every second he bought increased the chance of the turtles' survival. The headlights grew brighter behind him as the SUV gained ground. James veered toward the dunes, hoping the vehicle would be unable to follow. But the driver was skilled, keeping to the firmer sand while still closing the distance. Ahead, James spotted what he was looking for, the old pier. If he could reach it, the wooden pilings might offer some protection, somewhere to hide until help arrived. His lungs burning, he made a final sprint for the structure. The SUV was close now, its headlights illuminating his path with harsh clarity. He could hear voices shouting, though the words were lost in the storm's fury. He reached the pier and ducked between the pilings, the salt-treated wood slick with rain and sea spray. The SUV skidded to a halt on the sand nearby. Doors opened, and flashlight beams began probing the darkness beneath the structure. He's under the pier. Spread out, don't let him escape. James pressed himself against a piling, trying to control his breathing. He was trapped, but that had been part of the plan. As long as the poachers were focused on him, Elaine had a chance to get the turtles to safety. Footsteps approached, splashing through puddles of seawater and rain. A flashlight beam swept past, inches from his position. "Dr. Coleman," called the accented voice of the leader. "This is becoming tiresome. Come out now, tell us where the turtles are, and perhaps we can reach an arrangement." James remained silent. Another lightning flash briefly illuminated the scene, revealing 3 men spreading out beneath the pier. "We already have the other batch," the leader continued. "Your colleague was most cooperative after we convinced him of the futility of resistance." James's heart sank. Had they captured Marcus? Were those hatchlings already lost? "It's only a matter of time before we find the woman as well," the man added. "Why sacrifice yourself for a lost cause?" "A lost cause." How many times had James heard that phrase throughout his career? When he fought for wetland preservation in the 1970s, when he opposed offshore drilling in the 1980s, when he advocated for stricter regulations on commercial fishing in the 1990s. And yet he had persevered. Small victories had accumulated. Ecosystems had been saved. Species had recovered. No, this was not a lost cause, not while he still had breath in his body. A new sound reached him: engines, but not from the SUV. Rotating lights reflected off the wet sand. Police cars arriving on the beach access road. The poachers had noticed too. "Time to go," the leader ordered. "Find him first, no witnesses." The search intensified, flashlight beams crisscrossing beneath the pier. James knew he couldn't remain hidden much longer. He needed to move to find a different position. Carefully, he edged around the piling, staying in the shadows. But a loose board creaked beneath his foot. "There!" A flashlight beam locked onto him. James ran, no longer trying to hide. Behind him, he heard pursuit splashing through the rain-soaked sand. Ahead, the police lights were getting closer, but not quickly enough. A figure loomed suddenly in front of him, one of the poachers, cutting off his escape. James changed direction, heading deeper beneath the pier. The maze of pilings offered temporary confusion for his pursuers, but also limited his own options. He found himself nearing the water's edge, waves breaking around the pier's supports. "Nowhere left to run, Doctor," came the leader's voice, unnervingly close. James turned to face him. The man stood 10 feet away, his gun aimed squarely at James's chest. Behind him, 2 more poachers blocked any retreat. "Where are the turtles?" the leader demanded. "Safe," James replied. "Beyond your reach." The man's expression hardened. "I admire your dedication, Dr. Coleman, but it ends here." As he raised his gun, a powerful beam of light suddenly illuminated the scene. Not a flashlight, a spotlight mounted on a Coast Guard vessel that had appeared offshore. "This is the United States Coast Guard," boomed a voice over a loudspeaker. "Drop your weapons and put your hands in the air." The poachers hesitated, caught between the approaching police on the beach and the Coast Guard on the water. Their leader made a decision. "This isn't over," he said to James before turning to his men. "Back to the SUV? Now." They retreated, disappearing into the storm. Moments later, the sound of the SUV's engine roared, followed by the squeal of tires as it accelerated away. James sagged against a piling, exhaustion washing over him. But there was no time to rest. He needed to find Elaine to ensure the turtles were safe. He made his way toward the police lights, waving his arms to attract attention. An officer spotted him and approached, rain dripping from the brim of his hat. "Dr. Coleman." "We got a call from a Dr. Abernathy about endangered turtles and poachers." Margaret had received Marcus's message. Relief flooded through James. "My colleague Elaine Henderson," he said urgently. "She has 6 hatchlings. She was heading for the main road." The officer nodded. "We have units searching the area now, and the Coast Guard picked up a man named Marcus right from a boat offshore. He had several turtle hatchlings with him." So Marcus had evaded capture after all. The poachers' claim had been a bluff. "And the poachers?" James asked. "Roadblocks set up on Highway 90, they won't get far." The officer looked at James with concern. "You need medical attention, sir. You're bleeding." James touched his forehead, his fingers coming away red. He hadn't even noticed the injury, likely from his frantic escape through the pier pilings. "I'm fine," he insisted. "We need to find Elaine." But the night's events, combined with the adrenaline crash, were taking their toll. The world began to spin around him. "Sir, Dr. Coleman, can you hear me?" The officer's voice seemed to come from very far away. Then darkness closed in, and James Coleman knew no more. He awoke to the steady beep of hospital equipment and the soft glow of morning sunlight through vertical blinds. For a moment, he couldn't remember where he was or how he had gotten there. Then it all came flooding back: the turtles, the chase, the confrontation beneath the pier. He tried to sit up, but a gentle hand on his shoulder stopped him. "Easy, James. You have a concussion and 3 broken ribs." Margaret Abernathy sat beside his bed, looking much as she had when they last met 5 years earlier, her white hair cut in a practical bob, her face lined but still vibrant with intelligence and determination. "Margaret," he croaked, his throat dry. "The turtles," she smiled, the expression lighting up her entire face. "Safe, all 12 of them." Elaine made it to the road and flagged down a sheriff's deputy. Marcus's batch is secure as well. Relief washed over him. "And the poachers? 3 in custody. The leader got away, but they're tracking him. Interpol is involved now. Apparently, he's wanted in connection with trafficking of other endangered species." James relaxed slightly, though the knowledge that the ringleader remained at large troubled him. "Elaine, Marcus, both fine. They've been taking turns sitting with you. I sent them to get some rest." Margaret leaned forward. "You've been unconscious for nearly 24 hours, James. You had us worried." He attempted a smile. Tough old turtle, remember, that's what you used to call me. Yes, well, even tough old turtles need to know their limits. Her expression grew serious. James, what you three did was incredibly brave and incredibly foolish. You could have been killed. We didn't have a choice, he replied simply. Those turtles represent the future of their species. Margaret nodded, understanding in her eyes. She had made similar choices in her own career. Well, your reckless heroism has paid off in more ways than one, she said, reaching for a tablet on the bedside table. Look at this. She showed him a news website. The headline read, Endangered Sea Turtles Rescued in Dramatic Gulf Coast Operation. James scanned the article. It described the discovery of the Lowamba Ridley turtles, presumed extinct in the wild, and the efforts of the conservation team to protect them from poachers. His name was prominently featured, along with Elaine's and Marcus's. The story has gone viral, Margaret informed him. Environmental groups are rallying support. The governor has already called for increased security along the nesting beaches, and the Wildlife Conservation Fund has pledged emergency funding for a protected hatchery. It was more than James could have hoped for. Public awareness was often the most powerful tool in conservation battles. There's more, Margaret continued. DNA analysis of the hatchlings confirms they are indeed Lowamba Ridleys, but there's something unusual about them. She paused, her eyes twinkling with excitement. They show genetic markers that diverge from the captive population. James, these turtles have been evolving in the wild for decades, completely unknown to science. The implications were staggering. A remnant population that survived the collapse in Africa, but how did they end up here? That's what we're trying to figure out. One theory is that a few individuals were swept out to sea during the devastating floods in Ghana in the 1960s. Ocean currents could have carried them across the Atlantic. And they've been here all this time, James marveled. Adapting, surviving against all odds, Margaret nodded. Nature finds a way, James. You taught me that, remember, back in Kenya. Before he could respond, the door opened and Elaine and Marcus entered, followed by a doctor. He's awake. Elaine hurried to the bedside, relief evident in her face. The doctor checked James's vitals and pupil response. Looking good, Dr. Coleman, but I want to keep you for another 24 hours for observation. I need to get back to the station, James protested. The hatchlings are in excellent hands, Marcus assured him, grinning. Dr. Abernathy's team has set up a temporary hatchery at the station. State-of-the-art equipment, round-the-clock monitoring. Those little guys are getting better care than you are. The doctor left after extracting a promise from James to rest. The four conservationists, representing over 2 centuries of combined experience in the field, gathered around the hospital bed, united by their shared victory. I've been thinking, Margaret said. These turtles represent a unique opportunity. Not just for conservation, but for understanding evolutionary adaptation. How they survived, how they found their way here, how they've changed. These are questions that could inform protection strategies for other endangered species. We'll need a comprehensive research program, Elaine added. Tracking, genetic studies, behavioral observation. And security, Marcus emphasized. Those poachers won't be the last to come after specimens this rare. James listened to his colleagues, their voices blending with the hospital sounds around him. Despite his injuries, despite the danger they had faced, he felt a profound sense of hope. In a world where environmental news was so often bleak, where species disappeared before they could even be documented, they had found something miraculous, a second chance. I have a suggestion, he said when there was a pause in the conversation. Let's name the first hatchling Hope. The others nodded in agreement, understanding the significance. Now back to where we started, James continued, becoming more animated despite his injuries. That yacht Marcus spotted, I believe it belongs to Victor Crane. The collector? Margaret's eyebrows rose. He's been on our watch list for years, James nodded. And I suspect he's connected to the poacher who got away if we can prove that link. We could shut down one of the biggest illegal wildlife trafficking operations in the Western Hemisphere, Elaine finished. The group began strategizing, drawing on decades of experience fighting similar battles. As they talked, a plan took shape, not just for protecting the newly discovered turtles, but for using this opportunity to strike a significant blow against the illegal wildlife trade. Outside the hospital window, the Gulf Coast stretched blue and serene, the previous night's storm leaving no trace except for the freshly washed sky. Somewhere along that coast, against all odds, an ancient species had found a foothold, a chance to rebuild what had been lost. For James Coleman, lying in his hospital bed surrounded by friends and colleagues who shared his passion, it was more than just a professional triumph. It was vindication of a life dedicated to the belief that even the most desperate conservation situations could be turned around, that extinction was not inevitable, that hope remained as long as people were willing to fight for it. 3 months later, James stood on the beach at sunset, watching as 6 tiny turtles made their way toward the Gulf. Behind him, a crowd had gathered conservationists, local residents, media, even a few politicians eager to associate themselves with the success story. The Lowamba Ridley Conservation Project had become an international sensation. Funding had poured in, enabling the establishment of a permanent hatchery and research center. The beach area had been designated a wildlife sanctuary, with round-the-clock security and restricted access. Most satisfying of all, Victor Crane and his network had been exposed. The poacher who escaped, identified as Klaus Mercer, a notorious wildlife trafficker, had been arrested in Brazil attempting to acquire rare Amazon parrots. His cooperation with authorities had led to multiple arrests across 3 continents. "They're moving well," Elaine observed, standing beside James. "Strong swimmers," James nodded, pride evident in his expression. These 6 hatchlings, the ones he and Elaine had carried through the storm, had been the last to be released. The others were already out in the Gulf, carrying satellite trackers that would help researchers understand their migratory patterns. "Think they'll make it?" Marcus asked, joining them at the water's edge. "Some will," James replied honestly. "That's the way of nature, but more than would have without our intervention." Margaret approached, holding a tablet displaying a satellite map with 6 blinking dots. "The first batch is already 20 miles offshore, following the current just as we predicted." The 4 friends watched in silence as the tiny turtles disappeared into the gentle waves. The crowd behind them cheered, but for those who had risked their lives that stormy night, the moment was more solemn, more profound. "You know," Elaine said quietly, "in all my years of conservation work, I've never felt quite like this, like we've come full circle somehow." James understood what she meant. Throughout their careers, they had witnessed so much lost species disappearing, habitats destroyed, battles lost to political expediency or economic pressure. Victories had been rare and often temporary. But this was different. They had not just saved individual animals, they had discovered a species adapting, evolving, finding its own path to survival. It was a reminder that nature possessed a resilience that sometimes surpassed human understanding, that even in the darkest conservation scenarios, hope remained. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, James reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. From a young activist in the early days of the environmental movement to a seasoned scientist standing on this beach, he had held onto one core belief, that every species mattered, that biodiversity was worth fighting for, that the natural world deserved defenders. "What now?" Marcus asked, breaking the contemplative silence. James smiled. "Now we keep going. There's always more work to do." And there was. Reports were coming in of possible Lowamba Ridley sightings along other parts of the Gulf Coast. Genetic analysis of the hatchlings had raised new questions about adaptive evolution in isolated populations. The conservation world was buzzing with renewed enthusiasm, inspired by the discovery that extinction wasn't always as final as it seemed. For James Coleman, standing on that beach with the warm Gulf breeze on his face, watching the next generation of an ancient species begin their journey, it was enough. Whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, today had been a victory, not just for the turtles, but for the ideal that had guided his life's work. As darkness fell, the crowd dispersed, returning to their everyday lives. But the sea turtles continued their silent journey beneath the waves, carrying with them the hope of species that had nearly been lost and the legacy of those who had refused to let that happen. Thank you for listening. If this story touched you, please subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments.